Welcome to the NLX Podcast. This is a podcast from TNLC for all of you out there wanting to grow in your church leadership. We are so excited to come to you live. Well, not live. To come to you on YouTube.
It's one of the best of my favorite comedy special names on Netflix is Dimitri Martin's Live, parentheses, at the time.
This is true. It's live when we're doing this.
When we're doing it.
My name is Chael Branda, and I serve as the executive director here at Trinity New Life Church. I am joined by my co-host, Clayton Bell, lead pastor here at Trinity New Life Church.
Hola, mi amigos.
Oh, and he's Spanish today. Don't ask him to
Mi
do
no
his
se habla
French.
español.
Don't ask him to do his French accent.
Je ne parle français.
Because it's not that great. We are so excited today.
Afrikaans accent's pretty
Oh
good,
my
but
goodness.
Yeah, the French accent could use some work.
We need to jump into the second part of a conversation that we began last time on our New Life Next podcast. But before we jump into that conversation, I want to remind you that you can follow all of things happening with New Life Next on the Instagram at NLX Podcast. And if you ever have any questions, if you're looking for a leadership topic that you want to hear some thoughts and opinions on, you can email us podcast@trinitynewlife.com.
There you go. You can also, again, continue to like and subscribe on YouTube. You'll get notifications of Beyond Sunday podcast or anything else that we post up there. And again, we're on Spotify, iTunes, wherever you're listening to this right now.
Wherever your favorite podcasts are played.
Right. So this is part 2 of our conversation about leaders solve systems, not just problems. And here's a quick recap of that. That idea was if a problem that you see inside of whatever organization you're leading, whatever size, or whatever level of organization, if the problem is repeatable, then the solution needs to be systemic. It needs to be a systematic solution to solve a systematic problem. If you're seeing a problem occur over and over again and you just hit a one-time solution, like for us on a Sunday morning, for Colin and New Life students on a Wednesday night, or rehearsal on a Thursday night for their music and production team, but you don't solve the reason the problem is happening. You just solve the problem. You don't solve the reason the problem is happening. You're going to find yourself in a world of frustration because you're continuing to repeat and to give effort to the same thing that you've already done. Instead, a leader needs to be able to do pattern recognition, which again, we talked about a lot more last time, and see if a systemic problem is taking place. And if so, then you need to be able to give a systemic solution. So we're going to recap just a little bit of that. And then we're going to talk about what happens when the systems aren't perfect. But systems the advantage of solving things with a system and not just with your own gifting and personality is you lessen the need for a super leader and you allow people of a variety of leadership levels to come in and to be effective.
Right.
Because you've given it more of like, well, if you're a skilled enough leader, you'll be able to figure this out without any net, in a sense. There's a danger to that. You might, in fact, get people who are great, but overwhelmingly, you might have people who are rebuilding the problem or trying to rebuild a solution because they didn't understand exactly what was taking place. With some additional documentation, communication, and training, you can actually put a lot of different people of a variety of leadership skills in positions to be successful because you weren't depending on their greatness. You were providing them the foundation and the tools necessary to be great, which is why we always talk about you need to know the why behind things. You need to not just create a better what. Because if you are just building better whats, you might build a system that is contrary to the original problem you were trying to solve. It might become more efficient, but it stopped being as effective in trying to solve the problem that you originally identified. Good systems should bring life. Systems shouldn't bog down or slow down. Systems should bring life and speed up. It should, instead of allowing a growth multiplier, it should allow growth to happen at an exponential way. A good system should bring life, health, and hope rather than restriction, slowing, and constriction of people trying to move through your processes.
I think this really goes to the idea, even when you're talking about how to grow in your own leadership, because when you can explain the why behind a system, I can give a new system to somebody, and if they're understanding the why, I'm actually growing them in their leadership capacity. They now, because they know the why, they can take a checklist and be like, well, this might not be the most efficient way, or this might not be, and instead of building an army of people who can just check things off on a checklist, I'm actually empowering more leaders to come in and make these adjustments and changes and things like that. So when the system becomes too restrictive, when it becomes just a checklist, all you've done in your own leadership is you've made yourself the only one that has the why, the determining factor in order to make the difference. And you are not empowering anybody else behind you to come alongside and help to make a system flow properly.
So you've created a codependency on yourself. You've created a disenfranchised and disengaged, I don't even say they were leader because I don't even know if they are a leader at that point, but you've created disengaged followers.
Right.
And you are, not only in that codependence, you might be creating, an over anxious self because you know how much depends on you, so you don't feel like you can ever take a break. But as well, if you're not the person, you create the system, but you're not the person who's having to run the system, you might, and you don't teach them the why, the people running the systems, you don't teach them the why behind it. You also miss the chance to get a better what because the people engaged in it are learning and understanding, going, hey, I know that's what you want to try to accomplish, but having actually run the system a little bit, here's a better way to do this. And so that's what we're going to talk about today is what happens when there's a better way to do things, or when when you've tried to create a system, but the system doesn't seem to be accomplishing what you hoped that it would.
Systems aren't
Do I go for it?
perfect.
Yeah. So here's the thing. Of course, you can over system. You can create systems in such a way that you are trying to do things to be the most efficient and effective, and forget that systems should be designed to serve people. It should be designed to bring life. People are not designed to serve the system. Any good system should be designed to serve the people. Yes. Sorry, I was getting my analogies mixed up right there. And so you've got to think about the people inside of the system. You can't just think about nebulous people. We have the advantage in our church when we start beginning a process or thinking about a system. We're not going to wipe the slate clean of a particular team and then rebuild them. We do have to think about the personalities of the people inside of the systems. Think about the people and personality that are on the team. Is this realistic? Do we feel like we've got a team of really high capacity individuals and they still are struggling with our systems? Well, then maybe we don't need to change the individuals. Maybe we need to change the structure to be able to actually accomplish our goal, which is why, and here's another thing when systems aren't perfect, you also don't want to solve a person with a process.
Right.
Remember what we've talked about is a leader's got to be able to recognize, is it a singular one-off problem or is it a systemic problem? Is it reoccurring? Is it happening over and over again? And is it happening with multiple people? Is it happening in multiple environments? Or can you do the pattern recognition to be able to look at things and see, this seems to only happen when X is manning Y station.
Yeah.
Well, you don't want to create a system to solve one person. You don't need to create an entire process to solve one person. You just need to solve that one person.
That's called discipleship.
That's called discipleship. That's called leadership development. That's called freeing their future. Sometimes you do have to fire volunteers.
Sometimes you do.
Right. I mean, we're all with our phones now. And so, Lord knows how many times we would be looking at our phones if it didn't make the audio. It makes it go.
Yeah, it makes an awful sound. So that's why it's
So if you ever see our
far
phones,
away,
they're on airplane mode and we can't look at them. We try to look things up and then we forget. But on a Sunday, people are on their phones. We encourage people at times, a lot of times, to be on their phones. Well, what happens if they're on their phones when they're serving? Well, is one person on their phone all of the time? Or is it like, man, everybody in this thing is always on their phone? Well, then maybe you make a no phone policy. But if you're really not seeing that, you don't want to over legislate to everyone when the issue is really one person.
Yeah.
You need to have that one person conversation. And as we talk about creating a system can be too big. You can over system. You over system because it's a person. It's not really the whole thing. But then the other way you can over system is you can make a system for something that's way bigger than you. We're a church of 600 to 700 to 800, depending upon if you want to count the orbit, you want to count weekly attendance. Let's just say 675 to call it honest. All right. So we have also been a church of every size before that. And there are churches that are larger than us, churches that go up to 100,000.
Yeah.
Like our church, the Every Nation Church, Victory, Manila. Well, if we take processes from a 10,000 person church and try to put it into our church, it might add 4 to 5 steps that don't need to exist.
Right.
And you're going, yeah, but we're going to get there one day. Well, one, are we? And two, well, then keep an eye out for it. rather than force it to happen. Now, we've felt the reverse of that. We have felt and found where there are systems that were from when we were a 300-person church that people keep going, well, that's not how we did it. That's not how we did it. This seems overly complicated. And it's like, it may seem overly complicated because you were here and you had this way of doing it. But when we have to look at all 675 people being affected by it, that's when you see the need to be able to expand it. So you can over system by learning from people who are not a step ahead of you, but perhaps a mile ahead of you, multiple lengths ahead of you, and then trying to adopt their systems without having the same problems that you're trying to solve. The system in and of itself in a neutral environment may be good, but you're applying it in the wrong way. No, don't just learn what the system is from other churches, from other businesses, from other schools. Ask their why questions. Why did you do this? What were you trying to solve? What didn't work? Where did you have to see this changing as you grew? Learn the what of their system, but if you forget to ask the why behind it, you'll take a system that is outsized from where you are, either too big or too small, and try to apply it to where you are, and I'll be frustrated as of why it doesn't fit.
Yeah, because you really can't force a system. So if you have all of the how...
Well, shouldn't.
You shouldn't. You can. I guess
You
that's true.
can.
You certainly can.
Humans can do anything badly.
If you have the what, the how, like you have the things of certain systems, but you miss the why, you're going to lose out on some of the creativity in what works for your organization.
Right.
There is a tension that we have to continually manage between, well, this is where we're at right now, so this is what's working, and this is where we hope and pray and see us going. So where's the tension of what do we push into and believe for, and what do we maintain and keep where we're at? And when you take a system that's either not designed for you, or you're trying to force something that isn't where you're at yet, or you're trying to just force the same system that you've always done, what you tend to do is you tend to lose the creativity and innovation of the leaders that you are empowering and putting into place. And when you do that, and your regular team members and people coming into your church see that frustration on your leaders, you begin to narrow the pool of people who are willing to say, hey, I want to be a part of what's happening here.
Yeah.
And then you begin to lose real leaders who are coming up in your organization that you had no idea that they were there, but all they saw was the fact that you were forcing something that either you weren't ready for, or you were forcing something that you're just comfortable with. And it is continually systems are continually something that need to be nurtured and gardened and looked at and gone, hey, do we need to add these? I love it. I love taking systems that are currently in place at churches larger than ours or different things and looking at it and going, all right, I love this aspect and this aspect. And I was like, we can manage these two things. But then keeping the ideas of everything else that they have in the back pocket, so that when we have struggles or we have something, we're sitting down and we're in a room of people and they're like, well, what about this? Or what about this? And you're like, oh, and I also have heard this. And you start to really what we call these whiteboard sessions around here. And like you begin to whiteboard all these ideas. You have a plethora of things and incredible ways that God moves in the creativity of your people, that then not only does it make your team members feel a part of the growing and the growth and gives them the dreams and the desire to go with you, but you aren't forcing something that wasn't what you needed to be doing when you needed to be doing it.
Right, because you're forgetting about the people involved.
Right.
You forget about the people involved. You forget that they're the ones who can actually help you creatively problem solve. Now, God bless y'all, not everybody is equally creative. Right. And we've had enough testing of these systems, testing of that to find that. But there are then some people who are very creative. And it's not, when I say creative, I don't always mean like you smell colors.
Glitter is just what oozes out of your bags.
Because sometimes the people who are very good at that can't be creative when we're talking about a system.
Right.
And sometimes when people are really, really good at problem solving, they can't think creatively about, meaning think beyond the immediate circumstances in front of them to figure out how to create a system that would do that. And that's one of the things that we've got to make sure is you're always keeping the tension of it's serving the people are staying engaged. Because if the people don't stay engaged, like you said, what happens is they can become over-dependent on the system.
Yeah.
We say this in our pre-service rally a lot of the times. Don't be used by the checklist. Let You use the checklist to
Yeah.
accomplish your goal.
Yeah.
Don't be used by the checklist. And again, it's always easy to check out mentally and to go, I just got to accomplish these things. One of the most dangerous things that you can say is, well, I did my job. It's one of the most absolutely dangerous things.
Yeah.
You become overly dependent on a system, and you've lost the human engagement. Again, we've talked about maybe because they didn't know the why, or maybe because you wouldn't listen to them and give them an opportunity to be involved. So again, systems can go bad, just know why. Here's another time a system can go bad. When you create it before solving a problem.
Right.
If you notice a problem, you still need to solve that problem. You can't be like, something happens on a Thursday night. Something happens with the audio. And they're doing rehearsal. Your husband's one of our audio technicians. I don't know what we're doing with job titles quite yet, or when this will be
Moving
listened
on.
to.
Oh, by the way, for those of you who don't know, Thursday nights would be our music and
Yes,
production.
great point. Thursday nights is when our
music and production teams come out, and teams are out here
So
rehearsing. So
something
Thursday night,
goes
something goes
wrong.
wrong with the audio.
Goes wrong with the audio. Mike fixes it. Again, for those who listening who don't know, Mike is Chael's husband. Mike fixes it.
Right.
But then it happens the next Thursday and Mike's not there. The next Thursday Mike's on, it happens again, Mike fixes it. He might be providing the most elegant solution to the problem, but the problem continues to occur.
Right.
Think about this when it comes to scheduling. Somebody is this thing keeps happening with the scheduling. So it gets fixed on that Sunday, but then the same problem occurs the next day or the next week. The problem got solved, but then we saw the system. The danger would be if something is squelching on a Thursday night because the power and audio cables are being run right next to each other, which is causing mass chaos, and it just horrible buzzes all throughout everything. You go, all right, well, man, we got to solve that with a system because it keeps happening week after week. And you're sitting in not you, but anybody is Mike or whoever, Chris, our production, and Marley are sitting back in the booth, and they're working on a system to be able to avoid the power and audio cables ever being run next to each other. And all the meanwhile,
It's just the noise. Nothing is being solved. Yeah.
and somebody's dialing up to their AOL account. So even if a system is needed, don't miss the moment that's in front of you to actually solve the problem.
Right.
Don't think, as much as we're saying, don't just solve a problem, solve a system. Don't forget to solve the problem while you're giving yourself the opportunity to be able to go and make a system. So solve the problem that's immediately in front of you. Put the fire out. Don't let the building burn down. Then think about fire suppressant systems.
And in another podcast, we'll talk about how you bring the people together to solve the problem with a process and making sure you have the right voices, because sometimes you go in to solve the problems, let's be real honest, and instead of solving the problem, you've just come up with 16 other problems, and you're like, all right, we're just done here, because that's a whole another deep dive
I don't
there.
know. Those two conversations seem weirdly connected to each other. So anyways, so you've made a system. Your system is growing up. The system stops working. Why is it? You're going to start seeing the system break down for a variety of reasons. One of the main reasons, though, is when things get piled on top of each other.
Yeah, when you're making adjustments upon the adjustments upon the adjustments that you've had, especially if you've had a system that's been working. We see this all the time where a system is put into place and it's working, and then just it's almost like just a little hiccup, and you're like, oh, well, we'll just do this instead. And you're like, okay, that makes great. And so it goes on a little bit longer, and then there's just another little
Makes great
hiccup.
sense.
It's not a big deal. Oh, of course, the database system doesn't accept this anymore. So like, okay, well, we'll just do this
It's
instead.
an out-of-date field.
Yes, and so it's just a little, and then you're 4, 5, 6, 7 adjustments down, and somebody goes, hey, why isn't this particular automation working anymore? And you're like, oh, well, I don't know. And you go back and you realize that you've been making adjustment upon adjustment upon adjustment, that the original process doesn't work anymore.
We found that with some of our automated emails that we send to people whenever they get involved. There was one time we were adjusting and we're like, oh, we got to adjust the logo changed. Then we looked at the language and we were like, the body of this email might be 4 years old.
Yeah.
We've adjusted details and names, but the overall tone and the overall feel of it is so out of date. But we had it, we adjusted,
Right.
and then you get a Frankenstein system that might be keeping the plane in the air, but is no longer, and I think Andy Stanley says it this way, if you walked out of your company and then walked back in, what would you do differently?
Right.
Why aren't you doing that now? And I think when we look at our systems and we go, well, we used to do this and we added this and we took this away, we added this, we took this away. Yeah, but if you left now, wiped the slate clean, and then came in, seeing where everything is now, what system would you build to meet that? And how far is that from where you are now?
Right. Right. We see this, I'm particularly in the administration office, we can see this very frequently. But you'll see this on teams too, where people just add something to a checklist. Oh, this keeps getting forgotten, so we'll just add it to the checklist when we keep adding. And suddenly you end up with a 1,500 checklist thing. You're like, this thing's like a book I have to get through. It was like, oh, yeah, you're right. Because, again, it was just an adjustment upon an adjustment. And your system's going to eventually break down if you're just looking at those things instead of being able to go, I recommend this for people in higher level leadership positions to be like, hey, let's look at what processes do we have in place right now. I do this with my admins about once every 6 months where I'm like, everybody has to go through the email system. Go through it. Like,
look at every
read
one
it.
of them.
I want every email read. Everything. Like, are we looking at all these things? I actually just had them do this recently, and we found a broken link. And it was like, oh, hey, there's this link that no longer works. I'm like, good catch. Because again, when we're just making an adjustment upon an adjustment, it's just, we don't think through all of the things. So being able to go through that and really being proactive in how you're examining your systems is going to help you in the long run when it comes to these moments when you get frustrated because something isn't working. And then when you go back to look to see why it wasn't working, you're like, oh, yeah, that's why.
So if you, so this might be easier for Chael and I to say because we're in the organization that we lead, Trinity New Life Church. We're pretty high up in that organization. So it's real easy for us to go through and to try to make systemic changes. Most of the time when people are leaders, they are not the number one leader in their organization. Even if you may lead a department, you don't lead the company. You can still be a part of systemic change and systemic help. But it's coming from these principles of going, what is the system designed to solve? Do I understand the why? I thought we talked about putting these on airplane mode.
I know. It's on airplane mode. It's just not on do not disturb. So that was my problem.
When you're the curriculum developer, you're the manager of one team in a larger thing. Do you understand the whys of the processes and systems that you're getting frustrated with or running up into the limitations of? Have you thought about systemic ways to be able to solve it for a large variety of people, or are you just making something that's better for you? And then have you found a way to be able to say, hey, I want to help accomplish our goal, or are you saying, hey, I'm really frustrated about how this doesn't work anymore?
Yeah.
But because systems are going to change and break down at all different times. They become out of date. The demographics of the people that you're trying to serve change. Church service times change. Size change. When you begin to see all of those things taking place, the helpful thing is to reevaluate your systems and say, do they still fit?
Right.
Now, here's some examples from our church of how we've seen this. What does it look like when a system is restrictive? When you had a system, but the system is in fact restrictive?
We saw this when it came to... Sorry, I just saw a typo on the notes. Is this the D groups or is this the...
That's where you're onboarding people.
Oh, with our teams.
Well, D group signups did this as well.
Group signups did this, but with our teams, when we found here that when everybody was
much shorter, I gotta stay like this. We got new stools.
We got new stools, and now I'm tall, and it's kind of weird because I actually kind of look down at Clayton a little bit, and this is not a normal vantage point. This is not a normal vantage point for me. But anyways, when we saw this being really restrictive when it came to onboarding team members. So it was at one point in time, it was the responsibility of every one of our team directors to handle their own onboarding. But we found as we were growing and more people were interested, especially if they were interested in more than one team, that it was coming down to the idea of either some people, directors weren't getting back to emails as fast as others were, or the first person to respond back basically got the catch.
Yeah.
It was like these types of things. And we realized that in order for this to be, in order to really shepherd and steward the resource of volunteers and team members, we needed to create a person in a position that could really love on and care for all of the team members together and not restrict people to only one team in this one particular thing or whichever director happened to email them back first. But then we also saw this with discipleship groups.
Right. Yeah. So the team members we were instead of a little bit more spread out, we said, well, let's try to attack this in a totally different way. What if we had one person that helps to be able to serve those
that system.
Discipleship group signups? So the way we wanted to be able to do it wasn't technologically available. And so we were having to go through a restrictive, annoying, extra way to be able to do that. And then we just kind of kept running into it and going, we got to figure out a different way. And then right as we were really pushing into that, the technology changed to be able to do exactly how we wanted things to go, exactly what we wanted it to do. So we made the registration change. Even if we had a system in place for about a year and we had a good rhythm with it, there was a better way because technology allowed us to do that.
Because technology changes all the time. So we're always we're always looking to see how to make technology work for us. We don't look to be slaves to whatever systems or database systems or any kind of those types of things.
Kelly just found a formulaic problem that PCO has in the way that calculates things that she's going to let you know about tomorrow so you can slap their hand.
So the idea of all of those things are, you cannot do that to me on a podcast. Like throw things out. I'm like, my brain just went there. And all these. Anyways, so the other way that we will see example is when our system was too small.
Yeah.
It was one of those moments where, okay, we were growing faster than the system was. And that again was with discipleship groups because that's a place we've done a lot of legwork recently.
We had one discipleship group coordinator, and then it was like 8 to 12 groups, and that person could keep in contact with them, make sure they're doing good. But then when that was one person overseeing 16 to 18, it was like, wait, that's not... Then it was like, wait, is it 20?
Mm-hmm.
So one person overseeing 20, they're not going to be an effective leader, especially when that person was a volunteer. So we had to start tiering leadership systems inside of that. So it went a discipleship coordinator into area coach, or actually into group leaders, and then coordinator, coach, group leader.
Yes.
So that there was somebody that every group leader could reach out to and have as a connection point.
As opposed to having one coordinator overseeing 23 groups. That doesn't include
always group leaders because you might have multiple people.
Yes.
And then we had to add another one. So it went discipleship group coordinator into area coaches, into group leaders, because we wanted to be able to keep the system manageable to the number of people, but also still care for everyone. Now, if we had somebody who was doing it full time, we might organize a different structure, but this is within understanding our why and our resources. Right. This is the way we chose. And then finally, as an example of adjustments on adjustments, we used to have something called a service coordinator. We don't anymore.
Nope.
What is it called now?
It's called the Sunday manager.
But how did it change, and why did it change?
Well, when we had a service coordinator, I don't
know if I said this is adjustments on adjustments.
This is adjustments, and you did say that.
Okay.
This is the idea of, we had a service coordinator who kind of helped us run our Sunday mornings. They saw the whole board, kind of made sure all of the areas were running well, and at first go-to for the big problems on a Sunday morning. But we had this role, and this role just kind of evolved into a couple different things, and then we were realizing that it wasn't doing much, and it wasn't because our teams were growing at the same time. And so as our teams were growing, they found the need to have a single point person for their areas. So as opposed to a service coordinator...
So our production had a point person, NLK had a point person, and hospitality
had a point person. So while each one of them had point people, our service coordinators were still going into the nursery to check to see if they needed anything. Yeah. Or they were going to the greeters and ushers and asking them, hey, can you do this, or can you do this? Or going up to the lighting guy and being like, hey, those lights don't work for this particular song. And to understand that suddenly our team members were not only getting the voice of a service coordinator, but they were also getting the voices of now what the teams had found to be best for them.
Right.
So we had to pull back and realize that, we don't need a service coordinator. Our teams, because we have empowered our teams to operate efficiently on a Sunday, we didn't need somebody going in to check on the nursery kids. We needed somebody who was just checking in with the NLK point guard on a Sunday to be like, hey, how are you doing? Is there anything your team needs? Not like, what is your team doing that affects the rest of the church that I need to make sure everybody knows about? And so we made the change from a service coordinator to what we call a Sunday manager. And now our Sunday manager, they monitor our hospitality area lead, our production producer, and our NLK point guard on a Sunday. So now they're helping those leaders lead well.
Right. And so instead of trying to create, a very helpful system at first, we outgrew it. Yeah. And then we were just adjusting. We're going, there's so much overlap, so much confusion.
Yeah.
And clarity is caring, allegedly.
Yes.
So, leaders solve systems, not just problems. Don't forget to solve the problem on the way to creating a system. Systems need to serve people and create life People don't exist to serve the systems, and the systems should not restrict life. But don't over depend on them. Remember to keep real humans, real ideas, and real people engaged in them, and don't just rely on the system to be the same through every area, every time, every change that you go through. Proactively work on and not just in your system. Now, again, you did this at the top. Do you want to do it at the bottom too?
Yep.
Okay.
You can like and subscribe on YouTube. Give us a thumbs up, put a comment. Let us know how we can help you in your leadership. You can also follow us online, Instagram at NLX Podcast. Share the episode on a story. Let us know where you're listening from where you are listening from today. And if you have any questions, thoughts, opinions, you can email us podcast@trinitynewlife.com. Want to know more about NLX, New Life Next, trinitynewlife.com/NLX.
That's right. There's a couple leadership things you can sign up for right now. All right. Well, that is our 2-part episode on Leaders Solve Systems, Not Just Problems. We'll be back next month with some new life leadership thoughts. Have a great week.
Have a good one, everyone.
Month, day.
Bye.